Guys, welcome to the Peak Mindset Show. We have a special show for you guys today. She is the passionate organizational change management and communications specialist with a purpose in inspiring others to meet their potential. She was the kid of the 70-20-10 school, where 70% of what she knows she learned in life. In this, she brings lifelong experiences of being resilient in change. This alone helped her to transcend people's differences and truly connect with them during the entire change process. 20% of her knowledge about change and how people behave in change comes through active mentorship and feedback to her work. She believes that the investment of others in her growth as a change leader has been the backbone to her success. Finally, the 10% of her knowledge came from education, in which she learned through the Mount Royal University through change management. She consults many large corporate companies, being the person the president calls to resolve conflict within the organization. There was really no one quite like Kait when it comes to resolving conflict, along with being the org director for INBF Canada and many other companies as well. With great pleasure, I want to welcome the communications master, Kait Dinunzio, to the show today. Welcome, Kait.
Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm really great, thanks.
We're looking forward to hearing more about Kait and all the tidbits of knowledge you have for us and what you can share with us this morning on the show. So looking forward to having you, Kait.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
So tell us more about the background of what you do, because it's very unique in communication. So explain more about that.
Yeah, so what I do is I focus in the area of organizational change management and effectiveness of an organization. I focus a lot on process as well as effective communication to resolve conflict and continue to grow, right? Our companies are all about evolution and moving forward. And so my whole practice, everything I do is all about helping people grow and adapt and change, but be resilient while they're doing it and not forget that people are impacted by change.
Interesting. So your background actually stems from a few different areas because you've helped, small companies, large companies, organizations, and kind of the list goes on. But you do work a lot in the large companies as well, from oil and gas to you name it, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So I first started in change management with a very large organizational redesign project for a territorial department for a government. And so I've worked with governments from territorial to provincial to federal. I've worked with the National Energy Board. I've worked with pipeline companies, huge oil and gas companies, large oil startups in Fort McMurray. And I have clients who are in retail sport. And as you mentioned, I've been with the INBF Canada for almost 6 years now, working in the capacity of organizational director. We really don't see any organization as being too big or too small. Change is change, and people behave in change. It doesn't matter the industry, and it doesn't matter the size of an organization.
So the question is when you deal with change, because it's obviously this is kind of a big thing that, any company would go through, and even in life, right? What are the steps that you kind of go through, or say, for example, you get a phone call today from a large company that says, Kait, we need you to come in today, okay? When you go and talk to these companies, go ahead.
Oh, the first thing I was going to say is, we ask a lot of questions. I ask a lot of questions. So what kind of change are you going through? Where do you see your vision? Are we asking people to participate in the change, or are we just telling them that we're going to change? Because in diagnosing change and understanding what it is that an organization needs, we need to understand what the future state looks like. And, you work with some companies where technology is the change, and it's like, okay, well, we're moving from Windows XP to Windows 7. That's a pretty directive change, and it's just going to happen. So you got to get on the bus and find your seat and let's just go with it. But when we're talking about restructuring, or we're talking about reallocating people into new jobs, or moving people from what they know now into a whole new current state or future state with a whole bunch of new processes for creating efficiency in an organization, we need to understand whether we're telling them that we're changing, or whether we're inviting them to participate in the change. And so when I first go in and start actually diagnosing change, that's really what I do, is I go in and I ask a lot of questions to understand, do we know exactly where we want to go? And a lot of times organizations and leaders, they don't know what the end state looks like. And so diagnosing the changes, I know something needs to change. Something isn't as efficient. It's not working as well as it could be. Or I see something changing in an industry and I need to catch up to that, or I need to be ahead of it. And so understanding first and foremost what's changing and the direction and the end state and what that looks like, that's the baseline for every really good positive change.
Interesting. So what would you say is the big thing with communications that you would suggest, like I'm going to call it the turnkey thing, like what you see that if they implement this strategy in communications in a company, it's going to help resolve a lot of conflict?
Oh man, you know what? Don't treat people like they're babies. You will get the behavior from people that you put out there. And so if you're going to handle everybody with little kid gloves and hold their hand every step of the way, guess what? You're creating a behavior. You're telling people that's how we choose to behave here. But if we just tell people exactly what's going on within the confines of being able to really share information that's relevant to the individual and just being honest through change is a really, really big piece of it. And communicating with consistency and with clarity and not using really big fluffy words and, trying to over impress people, right? Like it's all about just being real, right?
Interesting. Explain vulnerability. Like how important is that in a company?
Vulnerability as far as people being capable as leaders to be vulnerable, I think it's a very fine balance, because you want to be vulnerable to a degree where you're inviting people to participate and provide their feedback into a change, if that's the diagnosis, if that's the direction you want to go. In some cases, you don't really want to be vulnerable. You want to be that leader. But in saying that, as you and I both know, being a good leader means that vulnerability in that case might be something as simple as being able to receive feedback well. Right. And if you can't receive feedback when people aren't happy in a change, they're not actually going to come to you and communicate that to you. So no matter what you put out there, you're not putting a foundation of trust down. And so if you can't have the vulnerability to at least be open to receiving feedback, whether you like it or not, you're probably not going to be as successful with people as you could be.
In one sentence, how could you explain effective communication?
Oh my gosh, in one sentence. Effective communication is literally me telling you something, you receiving it, and responding that you have understood it, right? I think effective communication is the willingness to give somebody what they want to hear, or maybe what they don't want to hear, as efficiently as possible.
Okay.
It's not easy. I don't think there's one sentence for effective communication.
So, okay, when a company calls you then, okay, and basically like sometimes probably don't know exactly all of what you do, right? So how do you explain to a company that calls you, say today, and say, "Hey Kate, want to bring you in, but we're not sure exactly what you're going to do exactly." Can you explain what you'd explain to them?
You know what? It really does depend, right? We've moved from just simply going in and doing organizational change management from a very simplistic methodology into understanding the dynamic of an organization and where they want to go. So again, that comes back to diagnosing the change. But if I were to say what I come in, I always tell people, it's kind of like a Spice Girl song. I'm a can-do kind of girl. You just tell me what you want, what you really, really want. I'm going to give you what you want, what you really, really want. And if I can't do that, I'm going to find the best people in the industry who can do that.
Wow, that's a good metaphor. Nice one. This Spice Girls song. I got that in my head now.
It's my earworm. I don't even need a business card anymore.
That's so good. So now, okay, so do you see a difference in how you would go into a company, whether it is a big one or whether it's just like a 5-person company? Like, is there a difference?
Absolutely. There's a huge difference. What we tend to see is in organizations where they're smaller, you kind of have to handle them a little differently, because when you come in as a consultant, it can be a little scary. People have experienced things in the past where maybe they've lost a job, or a consultant's come in and a reorg has happened, and some really horrible things have happened to them, right? So I'm very conscientious of those kinds of things. The other thing is that what you might apply in a larger company might not apply in a smaller company. Large companies have tons of processes, a lot of which are broken, misunderstood. They're QWERTYs. We do them just because we've been told we have to do them, and we've always done it this way, right? Whereas when you go into a smaller company or a mid-sized company where there might not be as many controls and processes, you get to be a little bit more artistic in the practice and a little less scientific, which is really fun.
Okay, interesting. So let's shift from the company, okay, over to like regular life. Let's say the everyday person, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about change management with, say, our spouse at home, or our kids at home, or our friends at work. How do we deal with effective change, like say in a relationship, or changing friendship with somebody, or all of a sudden our kids are growing so fast that they're changing. How do you explain to people, how do you deal with those kind of things? What's your process?
Well, one of the things that I do is I tend to bring people, because I do a lot of coaching with individuals. And so what I tend to do is I introduce them to the scientific side of change. What is change? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? Why don't I like what I'm feeling, right? So we justify that first. And so understanding that in the curve of change, it comes up like this, and the change starts here, and we kind of come down, and the first point where we hit is shock. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this. Wow, this is crazy. Then we might come down into a very brief or extended period of anger, depends what the change is. This is stupid. I don't know why we would do it this way. Whose decision was this? And then we come down into the bottom of the curve. And sometimes when it's a change that's not so good, and even when it is a really positive change, we find that people hang into that bottom part of the curve where it's the hanging and bargaining point of, I've been here before, I've tried this, it's never going to work until there's actually a breakthrough. And so that bottom point of the bottom point of the curve is where we have to really encourage people to have consistency and really push through the things that are holding them back to be able to discover what that new normal looks like. In a relationship, for example, you think about going from, being just boyfriend and girlfriend to moving in and maybe being engaged. And now we're living together, and you have to adapt to somebody else's whole living routine. And there are compromises along the way. And so as you're in that bottom point, man, he just leaves his dishes in the sink all the time. I can't imagine. The dishwasher is always empty, and it's like it's waiting for these dishes, and I'm at my wit's end. Well, what are you saying in order to make sure that the dishes make it from the sink into the dishwasher? Are you having those effective communication points where you can say, and it's okay to say, I don't like this, or this makes me feel uncomfortable, or this is new and I don't like that because it's new, right? And then when you communicate effectively and you start to come up that curve where it becomes, okay, we get this. Now I've told him I don't like the dishes in the sink. Maybe 80% of the time they make it into the dishwasher, and the 20% I can live with, right? And that's just how the change is going to be handled. Now, I mean, listen, that's a really simplistic way to look at it. And I always liken this to, a weight loss journey. When someone's going in and they're making that big change to their lifestyle. And Matt, as you know, I've gone through an enormous change in my life, having lost over 100 pounds. And during that time, because I chose not to manage my change very effectively, I sacrificed things like a marriage. I lost relationships. I just didn't handle it as well as I could have, because I was looking only in this little tiny bit like this, right? And I wasn't thinking about all these other things. I wasn't communicating effectively. And so, when you look at the different levels of the change process, if you actually pull on those resiliency factors like problem solving and empathy, emotional regulation, and self-confidence, you bring those into your journey, and the change becomes quite a bit easier.
Interesting. So now, for example, with communication, and say there's a thought in your mind, like I'm thinking right now that I have something I want to communicate to you over the screen, but I may have this thought of me thinking of it, but the way I explain it is different than how I'm thinking it. Now, you know what I mean? So how do you explain to somebody, because I know there's time even with Jen, for example, that I think of something, I explain to Jen, but all of a sudden she's like, well, you didn't tell me that. And I'm like, well, yeah, I did, but I realized my communication wasn't what I thought.
Yeah.
So how do you explain to somebody like how to improve that process?
Well, it reminds me of a story when I was very young, and my dad, I was going to Ottawa. I was drawn into a political party, and I was being sent to Ottawa. And my dad looked at me and he said, Catherine, remember, tact and diplomacy. Tact and diplomacy, Catherine, right? And so this is where I always think about my empathetic side. If somebody was providing me feedback or was going to invite me to participate in a conversation where we might not be talking about things that are as comfortable as they could be, or we're going to be having a difficult conversation, how would I want that information presented to me? What would make me feel okay? not great, but okay about receiving that information. And so I look to those resiliency factors again to say, okay, my emotional regulation, what does my face say when I'm talking to you? What does my body language tell you? Am I open? Am I expressing myself in a way? Am I not facing you when I'm talking to you? Am I turned away? What, like, so there's so many different pieces to communication and to being able to do that. Now listen, we're going to have faux pas. We're going to step in a little bit of poop every now and again, and it's going to be on the shoe, and it's not going to be nice. And you know what? This is where we come back to it and we say, okay, you know what? Maybe I didn't make a very good choice in my words, but that's not what I meant. What I meant to say was, right? And so effective communication, again, this is why you see it's not easy to sum it up into one sentence, because sometimes we have to revisit our past communications in order to be effective, to say what I meant to say was, or I didn't actually mean this, I meant this, right?
Okay. So say, for example, I communicate something to you, and it came across, like, for me, very direct, it was clear, it was communication, but you didn't receive it very well. So how do you deal with someone who doesn't receive effective communication very well?
Oh, that's pretty common, actually. And so what I find is I tend to be very concrete with my feedback to people, right? Instead of saying, I'm going to take a mode of transportation, I'm going to say, I'm going to get into my Ford Taurus and I'm going to turn it on and I'm going to drive, right? So it's as concrete as you can be without being, flippant or really ignorant to somebody, right? So if there's something that I really want, I'm just going to tell you what I really want, and then you're going to give me what I really want, right? Like the Spice Girls, they had it right.
But say, for example, you're in a company, okay, and you're the leader of the company, and you go and you're working with the president or whoever it was, and they communicated something that was like to all the 75 employees, in the company, and it was very direct. Like, it was totally like a shift and change in what they were doing already, a new system that was put into process. But half of the employees got really upset. They wanted to leave the room. People were, like almost like I'm going to say the term I want to use. They're rebelling against basically what the president was saying. How do you deal with something like that?
That's actually fairly common. People bring me in after they do things that aren't very good. A majority of the time, people do that. When it comes to change, they don't realize that there are people who specialize in this area of business. And so what happens is they go and they change something really big, and just what you've described happens. A rebellion happens, or this really strong undercurrent happens. And so when I come in, I really position myself as somebody who is there in service. Right? So I try and be a very service-driven individual. And I think that as a leader, that's a really big part of it, right? Like there's that saying, if service is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. Right? And so being a service-driven leader means that you're not necessarily an employee of an organization, but when you come in, you're in service to everybody. You're there to ask them what they need, right? And really going to them to listen, and listening to understand, but not listening to respond or to problem solve or fix it right away, but just really trying to go in and, as much as we diagnose the change, let's diagnose the problem and let's understand the conflict. And one of the things that I often say to employees who are very upset with their bosses or their owners of the companies is, guys, if I'm here, it means that the organization is investing, because this type of service is not a fly-by-night. It's not something you pick up at Walmart. It's not like, salt and pepper where we're just going to whip by the market and sprinkle it on and everything's going to be okay. It takes time and it takes cooperation. And this is when I start to go in and I start to play with other people's organizational strengths and say, okay, what are we really good at? And what don't we want to lose? And then let's look at our weaknesses and let's build on those or eliminate those. And we help bring people in to be part of the solution as opposed to being part of the problem. Now, listen, you're always going to have people who are going to want to be a part of the problem.
Right.
My guess is a majority of people, and this is a John Cotter saying, I saw him speak at a change conference a couple of years ago, and he said, people get out of bed in the morning and they're looking to exploit opportunity and avoid hazard. Nobody wakes up in the morning saying, man, I can't wait to make Matt Park's day garbage today, right? And so let's play on that. We just rolled out of bed and it's not a great day and something's happened and I don't understand why, right? And that comes into here and it comes into the gut. So what is the heart telling us and what is the gut telling us? Because when we can marry those two things together with logic and process, and we can explain away what's not right and why we're making the change, then we're going to be in a much better place. A majority of the time, change fails because people don't understand why and why now. If you can explain the why now and the why, the how takes care of itself.
So how do you teach somebody to listen more from their gut and their heart?
I teach people through proof. Social proof is one of the most amazing tools you can actually employ, is to go into an organization and really demonstrate what leadership looks like, what people are craving. And it's different for different people. I have a client in New Jersey, and some of their people just don't respond well to some of the things and some of the tactics that we use. So there are opportunities for us to just enjoy those relationships with them on their terms, right? And sometimes it just has to be what somebody else needs as opposed to what I think they need. Because, I would say probably about 80% of the time I can get it right, but 20% of the time somebody's going to be really disgruntled. They're going to be upset. They're going to want more. They're going to want something that's completely different. And it's just enough to sit down and help somebody feel heard. And that is very, very, very important in change. Do I feel heard? Am I important? Am I valued? Right? Which then bleeds all the way back to our resiliency factors, my self-confidence, my emotional regulation, my ability or my willingness to solve problems. How empathetic am I going to feel toward you who's losing sleep over the fact that you're running this big change process and nobody's buying in, right? So it's all of those different things. It's all very tied together if you actually employ the different pieces and put them together.
Interesting. So one thing you mentioned to me years ago when I first met you, it was about how some people can have run a company or whatever, and basically not get paid to run a company, or get paid to run a company, or in a company, or doing whatever they're doing. But I've noticed one thing you taught me years ago is you were explaining to me a process where dangling the carrot kind of thing, I think what it was, right? Is when there's enough, I believe, vision or why behind the purpose or some sort of means. You explained it way better when you taught this to me years ago. But like how I find some companies, for example, INBF, for example, is very much a volunteer organization, right? Yeah. But some companies are getting paid thousands and thousands of dollars a month, but they aren't even producing any results. So, like, what is the factors behind that, Kate? It's very cool what you shared with me years ago about that process.
Yeah, and so this one you tie right back to Daniel Pink. If you haven't read his book, Drive, it's a fantastic read. Now, if you want to Google it and you just want to watch his 11-minute RSA video, go ahead and Google Drive. But the foundations behind Drive, which I'm a certified facilitator of the program, is that there are 3 things that motivate people to come to work. And it's not money, and it's not anything like bonuses and positioning and all of those different kinds of things. But what it is purpose, mastery, and autonomy, right? Purpose. What's my purpose in an organization? Matt, I think back to the first time that I ever took a peak mindset class from you. It was in, I want to say, June 2012. Up in Edmonton, Alberta.
Good memory.
And we were sitting there and we did a values assessment. And so I've actually taken the values assessment and I've blown it out. I have it in 6 different programs in my company that I use with different clients on different things. And the values that we talked about, I still use to this day. My number 1 value is purpose. Purpose, discipline, quality, attitude, and success. Purpose is number 1. If it serves me no purpose, why am I doing it, right? But in an organization, and when we're thinking about how people engage in the workforce, what is my purpose in the organization? How do I make this huge conglomerate tick, right? And it's more than a job description. Purpose is something that brings me to work in the morning. I understand how I fit in. It links to my self-confidence and my capability and my skills, right? So again, you're taking one business model and you're bleeding it in, and you're seeing how the different pieces and the vines kind of come together to create the jungle of leadership, right?
So are you saying purpose is the main factor in getting people motivated to really move towards that vision?
It's a big piece of it. The second one is actually mastery. And Daniel Pink is quite a bit more eloquent in his research and his explanation of this. But mastery is really taking the things and the tasks and tying them into my purpose. So I understand my purpose, but then what are the things that I'm doing? They can't be too easy. They can't be redundant. Otherwise, I get bored. They can't be too hard, because if they're too hard, then I feel stressed, right? So Daniel Pink, what he calls it is the Goldilocks task. right? So those things of, I can do it. It challenges me, but it doesn't challenge me to the point where I feel really stressed out and anxious about it, right? But again, we take our mastery and our ability to do those things and we tie it to self-confidence and our resiliency factors. So you think about that, and our resiliency factor of self-confidence, we know that self-confident people are confident when they understand and they are capable in their tasks and duties. So that's step 2, right? Number 3 is autonomy. How much capability do I have to just play in my own playground, in my sandbox, and build my sandcastle? Are you telling me my team, my time, my tools? Or do I get to predict and say, well, I have this project to fulfill this part of my purpose, pursuing this part of my mastery, and I get to pick Matt to be on my team, right? We always find that people who have a little bit of autonomy are very successful simply for the fact that they get to predict their outcome, right? However, the other piece of that, though, is that if you give someone too much autonomy, what tends to happen is everybody else is playing in the playground and they're out in traffic. And you're forever, as a leader, going out and grabbing that person by the wrist and bringing them back to the playground and saying, we have to stay within the confines of our boundaries. But if you haven't set those boundaries because they have so much autonomy, then you're always going to have those problems with that same individual. So having boundaries to the mastery and the purpose, and having that level of autonomy that's appropriate for the person's skill set and understanding and leadership style is very important.
Wow. Those 3. So it's purpose, mastery, and autonomy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That was
those
fantastic.
2 things. And every single one of those links directly into your resiliency factors, and each one of those resiliency factors link directly into your ability to manage change effectively and communicate effectively.
Wow. Now, this is something you teach, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And this is obviously from also the book called Drive as well?
Yeah. So the foundation of purpose, mastery, and autonomy is from Daniel Pink's book, Drive.
So guys, check that book out, guys. Daniel Pink, Drive. That is phenomenal. Wow. Let's go into peak 5 questions, Kate, okay?
Sure. Sounds great.
So the first question we have for you is, who is someone in your life that has been a big influence? It could have been a coach, a mentor from years ago, anybody that you can think of.
Well, you know what? I got to say that the person who taught me everything I know, when the baseline of the 70%, is my dad. My dad worked in a jail for 25 years, and he was a single father in the Yukon and raised 2 girls all by himself. Every communication skill I have, the very baseline of what I have, I've received from my father. He was initially a jail guard and moved his way up into a case manager. And when I have a hard day or I have a problem that just can't be solved, I pick up the phone and that's who I call. Dear old dad, because he's got it all.
Wow, I love it. Number 2, what was a book that was highly influential in your life?
Oh man, you know what? The one book that was highly influential in my life had to have been, as far as, business, is Drive. And that's one of the reasons why I've taken on teaching and facilitating the Drive Workshop Canada, because the things that Daniel Pink speaks about are not material. They're not the things that we have on the exterior. It's the things that feed the heart and the mind. And that's really huge.
That's huge. Number 3, what was your most influential quote?
Oh man, my most influential quote would have had to have been Admiral Thad Allen at the 2011 inaugural Association of Change Management Professionals conference. And, he spoke about his time working through change with Hurricane Katrina and 9/11. And, he said, change is like the weather. You can choose to withstand, you can adapt, or you can, oh my gosh, I totally botched that. Yeah, it's a beautiful quote of, you can resist it, or you can suffer, or you can adapt, is basically what it went down to.
Awesome. Number 4, if you could tell your 20-year-old self one lesson, what would that lesson be?
Learn to receive feedback better and sooner in life.
And that would have been how many years ago?
A few.
I was waiting. I was going to get you. Number 5, if there were no limits, what would you contribute to in the world?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I would probably, if there were no limits, my absolute dream opportunity would be to go and work in my field of passion and practice at the United Nations. I feel like if we were to take a methodology of change and resiliency and a message of peace and love to the United Nations, we could break grounds and we could eliminate so many misunderstandings if we just opened our minds and our hearts and our arms and took it at a global level.
So how can you make that happen, Kait?
If I believe it, I can achieve it,
Oh,
Matt.
man. You know what, Kait? Come on. You are the go-getter girl. Oh, yeah, this is awesome. So I'll be you again probably like 2 years from now. You'll be the United Nations, one of the people on the board, like telling everybody what to do. So good.
Well, you never know. I did meet Kofi Annan during G8 in Kananaskis a couple years back there.
First step.
First step, gotta get into my Rolodex and give him a call.
Exactly. So, Kait, where can we find you online?
You can find me at theartofprogress.ca. You can also find me in my bodybuilding on Instagram at Kait_DEE. And other than that, that's kind of where my social profiles live. I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to dial me up on LinkedIn and have a look at my profile. Always open for a chat and seeing what other great things are out there that people are looking to break barriers on.
Is there anything else you want to add to the show before we finish the show today?
You know what? I think we've covered a lot of ground today, Matt. I'll look forward to another opportunity to come back and chat with you again and see what other things maybe people want to hear from us.
That's excellent, Kait. Guys, Kait Dinunzio, The Art of Progress. Check her out online, her Facebook, her LinkedIn, and her website. Kait, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time. And guys, share it with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and wishing you all an absolutely awesome day. Thanks, Kait.
Thanks, Matt.